Hello, my name is Marc-André Hamelin, and this is Living the Classical Life. That's all we get, just one clap?
Just one clap? Exactly. Yeah, budget cuts.
Yeah.
Mark, it's a delight to welcome you here onto Living the Classical Life. Thanks for being on the show.
Of course, we've been wanting to do this for a while together.
For a long time. You know, actually, it was funny. I was just recalling that when I first met you in Cleveland years ago, one of the first things you said to me was that you were a fan of the show. So it's wonderful to, in fact, have you as a guest. So,
very happy.
Here you are in New York City. Your Carnegie Hall recital is tomorrow evening. In the world of so many pianists who aspire to this opportunity, some might be wondering, the day before a concert, what does that feel like to you? Is this any different from any other concert that you prepare for on a regular basis?
I mean, there are certain venues. I don't put down, any venues as being less important or whatever. I mean, everything is important because the audience is always important. I mean, every single member of the audience is important. The duty that I have for transmitting music and and making them appreciate the music, is equally important everywhere. But inevitably, I mean, there's when you get to somewhere like Wigmore Hall or Carnegie Hall, or the Albert Hall or the Berlin Philharmonic, there's always a little something extra special, I think. Carnegie has been very faithful to me these last few years. My ascension, if you want to call it that, has been slow over the years. I consider myself somewhat of a late starter, because partly because of the repertoire that I was espousing at the beginning. I think promoters were quite cautious with me, with the result that between my first two recitals on the Stern stage at Carnegie Hall, 28 years elapsed. I won the Carnegie Hall American Music Competition in 1985, and that earned me a recital on the big stage in '88. And it wasn't until 2016 that I played there again. And I never thought it would happen again, but thankfully. And now they have made it a yearly event, which I'm so thankful I can't even begin to express it.
In your preparation for the performance for your own self, understanding that the audiences are equally important everywhere, if you're appearing in a place like Carnegie Hall that has a wide visibility, the widest possible visibility, is there a different way in which you psychologically prepare yourself to ensure, if needed, your optimal performance state? The reason I ask, I remember one of the first interviews I heard of you was I believe it was on NPR in the 90s, and I remember one of the things that you said that struck me was, if it comes down to choosing an extra hour of sleep or an extra hour of practicing, always choose the sleep.
I said that?
I recall that, and I remember that. I've been living by that advice ever since.
I must have said it then. Well, I guess it would probably depend on the day, but I'm not a napper on concert days, and generally not a napper ever, because I don't nap very well. What I do try to do actually is to regulate my the time at which I eat, and I really try to have my stomach as empty as possible, reasonably empty, not completely. But if I can eat 3 or 4 hours before and not later, I think I have a much better chance of thinking more clearly at the moment of performance. Because when I started, I didn't know what to do. I thought, let's load up with carbs, just before the concert. I'd eat huge plates of spaghetti, With my diabetes, I can't do that anyway now. But I wondered sometimes why I just couldn't get it together mentally, and I think that was the reason.
I think for me, when I'm preparing for higher profile performances, the thing I try to gauge for myself or even watch is the conservation of energy. Because if I'm anticipating something, especially if I'm overthinking it, as I tend to do, then my energy runs out the door ahead of the actual event. Mm-hmm. Is that something you've had an experience with?
Mainly in the area of dress rehearsals. Very often what happens, especially with concerti, playing with orchestra, what happens is that I'm just so happy with the dress rehearsal. I'm coasting and everything is just falling into place, and it's wonderful. And sometimes, at least to me, I don't know about the audience, but there's a little bit of a letdown because I've given too much during the dress rehearsal, which is usually in the morning, the same day as the concert. So I'm learning. I think I should really learn not to give everything I've got, at the beginning of the day, but it's difficult not to,
Yeah.
because you just want to do it right all the time.
If we think of the complexity of our musical task, on stage, in the practice room, everything we aim to achieve musically and technically, is there then also room to take risks on stage? And do you aspire to take risks?
Always.
Do you try to go for it?
There should be. I think the trick is to be as well prepared as you can, mentally, corporally, excuse me, and then if you are so inspired on stage, I think little variations, deviations, risks, as you say, can occur and should occur if you find that they fit the emotional context of what you're doing. Conscious eccentricity is where I draw the line.
Do you find it easy to find a zone of fantastic concentration?
It depends on the day. It depends on sleep, on eating, how tired your traveling made you. I mean, all kinds of things.
So let's say there's a day where you don't feel up to your zone. Are you just more forgiving with yourself?
The thing is, if I'm not in shape, I don't always know it. Sometimes, and so I get on stage and I'm wondering why it's not working quite as well as I wanted to. And then I'll think, oh yeah, well I had 5 hours of sleep last night. That must be it.
Yeah.
But I'm not always, because when I'm on stage, it's all of the moment, and I'm not necessarily thinking about what went on before.
Is the stage a place of joy for you?
Oh yes, oh yes. I am very lucky in that I've never experienced stage fright, and I can say that actually from the very beginning. My first public performance wasn't a concert; it was actually a competition, and I was 9 years old. I started at 5, but my first public appearance was a local competition. I remember it was in a small room. I was maybe I don't know, 50 people sitting there, and I just, played my little pieces, and I don't remember ever being frightened or intimidated.
Well, what do you think accounts for that? Because the vast majority, in fact, to date, we've filmed about 80 episodes of this show, and we've only met 2 performers, one violinist and one cellist, who reported that they don't experience stage fright. And to me, that's tantalizing. Everyone else seems to have a lot of suffering with it. So I'm trying to understand the psychology of someone who approaches the piano on a big stage like Carnegie Hall and doesn't get crushed by expectations that maybe you don't expect too much out of yourself, and therefore you have room to breathe.
I think the mindset that I have really is it directly relates to my feeling about performing. To me, a performance is not an exhibition. It's an offering. I dearly want the public to like these things that I love so much, and I want to share them. And I'm doing everything I can to make them appreciate them the same way that I appreciate them. And because of that, I there's not much room, I guess, to think about having a fear of screwing up. Mm-hmm. I guess that's what's happening.
But don't you think that offering something is also a place of vulnerability, that it also invites judgment, whether from yourself or others?
Yes, but I want them to judge the music and not me.
Huh.
See, it's all it's all about the music I try to offer and make them appreciate.
Do you think that this if I would call it a level-headed approach to what we bring of ourselves on stage. Do you attribute that to perhaps your father's musical influence in your life? I know that you would look at scores together, and he was, I believe, a pharmacist. And
But first and foremost, a music lover and a very good amateur pianist. Yeah.
Maybe having seen, I don't want to call it a day job, but another life and then the musical life, maybe he was more realistic in what he showed you about what to expect of a musical life?
I'm not sure about that because he had no more of an idea than I did about what a concert life actually involves. I entered into piano studies simply because it was natural. There was already music, a lot of music in the house, and it was like a game for me almost. You know, I seemed to have good predispositions. I had perfect pitch, as he did. So I'm not sure that the influence really stems from that, or was of that nature. But what I got mostly out of him is an appreciation of the repertoire, because he was playing a lot for himself. He loved Chopin, Liszt, and Schumann most of all. 19th century really for him was it. I mean, he wasn't too fond of the classical period as a rule. Mm-hmm. And his appreciation of 20th century music didn't go beyond Prokofiev's Seventh, let's say, which is already, I guess advanced.
So talk about being drawn to this type of repertoire as being not necessarily mainstream for concert presenters, and that the trajectory of your career was a little bit slower. Do you think that there are, in fact, benefits to having a career that unfolds slower? I look at careers that explode before the age of 20, and I wonder if that's really serving the development of the artist.
Well, my agents tell me that my path has been very steady, and that's a good thing. Even though it sort of ascended slowly, you know, it's been a good thing in my case. It's never really, I've never really had a slump, you know, which is also good. So I count myself very fortunate. Because, I mean, I mean, when you see these young people are suddenly like peaking, like suddenly, but a few years afterwards, you know, that there's no sustaining of their career, and that's unfortunate. But the musical world can be like that. Yeah.
So the Carnegie Hall recitals tomorrow,
Yeah.
and I'm putting myself in your shoes. Here's the performance. The first work is the Scriabin Fantasy, one of my favorite pieces.
Oh, it's to die for.
Exactly, but it, in a short time, opens up to the most complex experiences of life, really. I think it really has the full array of life experiences in that. How do you walk onto stage and open yourself up to that experience?
Again, I have to come back to the fact that a lot of people don't know this piece. It's played from time to time, certainly, but I think you'll agree that it's not standard repertoire.
No.
Yeah. It is, for all intents and purposes, a sonata movement, and which is why I included it close to 25 years ago in a complete recording that I did of the Scriabin sonatas, you know, because it was the closest thing to a sonata, except that it wasn't a sonata by name, so I thought it would fit very well. But funnily enough, all these years I never played it in public until very, very recently. So, but I've played it just enough now so that it won't seem like a new piece. Mm-hmm. My very first Carnegie Hall recital, I mean, I was such a fool. My entire second half was pieces I never played before. I try not to do that. But yeah, the Scriabin is glorious. There's this second theme, which I think is as good as anything Rachmaninoff ever wrote. You know, forth. I mean, I wish I'd written that, you know.
It's a moment of relief, really, that comes back later in such a titanic, cathartic way.
When the recap comes, it sounds like this. So forth.
Then in discussing the rest of your program for Carnegie, I believe, is it the Prokofiev that's next, the Sarcasms?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, so I'm wondering, because I've seen different performances of yours, whether in person or online, there have been a number of pieces that you've explored that are humorous in nature.
Yeah, I can't do without it.
Yeah.
I can't do without humor.
And I know that in your Paganini variations, your own composition, there have been plenty of moments where audience members seem to even laugh at some of the references that
that's always very gratifying.
Yeah. What's the place of humor in music for you, and why is that important to you?
Well, it's just one part of the gamut of human emotions. I mean, there's no reason why it should be excluded, I think. Yeah. I have a story about that piece, actually. I had been playing them for a while. I wrote them in 2011. In 2013, I gave a concerto performance at the Musikverein in Vienna. And it was a peculiar situation because we did, in the first half, the Bernstein Age of Anxiety, which was asked of me. I didn't propose it. But then they wanted me to do a solo piece, and they suggested one of mine. So I was peddling my Paganini variations at the time, which are, I always call them sort of my comedy number, because there's some humorous things in there. Rather crude humor, I should say.
Crude musical humor.
And I played them a fair amount of times, and often got outright laughs. Well, the Musikverein is a little bit different because, first of all, they leave all the lights on. And I was on stage, and the musicians were still there. This was at the end of the first half. They're still, at my left. And there, and there, there's balconies. And I felt like everybody was like that. And at the places where I usually hear laughs, I could have heard frogs croaking. It was nothing. I felt like a comedian bombing on stage. And that's horrifying.
Well, I mean, do you feel like certain audiences respond more to references? I mean, I'm thinking of your Moscow performance of your Paganini variations, where you threw in a reference to Beethoven's Fifth Symphony, and then everyone starts laughing. What do you think that's about? Are certain cultures just a little bit more inclined to laugh than others? I mean,
in Italy, I used to do as an encore a piece by Salvatore Sciarrino called Anamorfosi, and it starts like Ravel's Jeu d'eau, but the tune in the middle is Singing in the Rain. And I was told that a gentleman started sort of tittering, and his neighbor went, shh. It's classical music, it's serious.
To which you reply?
Well, if you're supposed to laugh, or if you think you're supposed to laugh, go ahead.
And then I think some of that, as with a comedian, it's probably a matter of timing. There's a performance, I believe it was a humoresque by Shedrin, where at some point you play the return of the theme, and then you slowly turned to the audience, then you turned back, and that was the moment they all laughed.
That's a cheap device. I'm not sure I would do that now.
So back to your Carnegie program.
Yeah.
The Prokofiev sarcasms, I mean, that's maybe a more complex, emotionally more complex world than just purely humor, if we're talking about sarcasm.
Yeah, I wouldn't call it humorous at all.
At all?
Yeah.
How do you switch from the world of Scriabin into Prokofiev just like that? Is there is that just work that has to be done? I mean, really, at home, if we're practicing a work, that's self-contained universe. But we haven't necessarily, in my case, run the program enough times to just switch on demand like that.
Well, I think to answer your question, I'd take a couple of steps back and simply look at the first half of that program in general, because you have it's all Russian. It's the Scriabin Fantasy, the Prokofiev Sarcasms, and then the Feinberg Third Sonata. They are wildly different, although the Feinberg can somehow be related to the Scriabin, especially the beginning of the third movement, for example, which is very Scriabin influenced, I believe. But the main thing, the main purpose, I think, is to present three very different facets of Russian piano music. And that in itself, I think, unites those three works. So I'm not bothered by differences. In fact, I welcome them.
Mm-hmm. And it's not difficult to adapt on the spot?
Not for me. Not for me, because I wouldn't recite Shakespeare like I recite Charles Bukowski or William Burroughs or something like that. You know, you just have to make the switch. You have to be able to make the switch.
The Feinberg Sonata is an incredible work, and I had the privilege of hearing your first run-through of this work in my living room in Cleveland. I'll never forget the experience of it because of its complexity. I remember at the time you were reading off of the score. Mm-hmm. How do you digest a piece like that with enough time? I mean, do you really determine enough time before you bring it onto stage, say at Carnegie Hall?
Well, in that particular case, I didn't have any kind of deadline to deal with. I just took whatever time it took, and I've since played it. In fact, I've always, I think, played it from memory. I do play it from memory now, mm-hmm. And it just stems from endless repetition of and not only at the piano, but also you're always thinking about it, mm-hmm. And I wouldn't say that there was a love affair with this piece, but maybe almost an obsession, mm-hmm. And that helped me internalize it.
Do you think
now, whether it would be more difficult for others, I can't say. I don't have their brain; they don't have mine. But I can only tell you about my experience with it.
Well, that was the thing. I was turning pages for you as you were playing it, and the complexity of this score to me indicated that probably you, on some level, had to have it memorized anyway. Do you?
Inevitably.
Inevitably.
Yeah.
Is it better to perform a piece memorized?
Oh, that's an age-old question. I believe that for a public performance, theatrically, it is better. Simply because it reinforces the fact that I am there, I alone am there to tell you a story and to share something with you. The moment you have a score in front of you, and especially with a page turner, it becomes to look like a task or a job. Mm-hmm. And to me, that kind of thing sort of pulls you out of the narrative. Uh-huh. And you have to be a very, very sympathetic listener, I think, to excuse that kind of visual distraction. There's a rather hilarious video circulating of Richter playing the Gershwin Concerto with a Latvian orchestra. I don't know if you've seen it.
I have.
I mean, here he is with a page turner playing this brilliant jocular, swinging music. Basically like he seems to study it like a professor. And to me, that's just. The music really can't be gotten across that way.
The Feinberg Sonata is probably one of the most complex, dense scores that I've ever encountered. What was the audience reaction to this music? Do you think they got it?
I've played it about, I'd say, 6 to 8 times. I'm not sure exactly how many at this point, but within the last couple of years. And It's been much better than I expected. On occasion, including when I played it at the Wigmore Hall last month, I preceded it with a few sentences to the public, and I said something like, this is the only sonata among Feinberg's 12 that he never published. It was published posthumously 12 years after his death. And the reason was perhaps because he had thought he'd gone too far. And I said, see what you think.
Gone too far in terms of the demands on the performer, or gone too far musically?
No, strictly musically.
Strictly musically.
Because it's really rather excessive, not only pianistically, but also, I mean, okay, you have this third movement. The first two movements are kind of short, you know, so they're sort of introductory, a prelude and a funeral march. But then you have a sonata movement, which is a normal exposition, you know, a wonderful G-sharp minor thing, and it's repeated. Or at least I repeat it, and suddenly, after that, you know, he takes you in a completely different direction. He takes you by the scruff of the neck, forces you to look elsewhere, and becomes completely atonal. And then there's a meandering for a little while, and then this demented fugue starts in a totally unrelated key, which in lieu of a development, and you really don't know where it's going to go. But finally, it comes back to the opening material, the exposition, and then you get the second theme, and then you think, oh, it's going to end in a major key. Great, you know, a real sense of conclusion, and then he goes on for 6 more pages. He's just not done. When you are through with it, when it does end finally, you think, well, yeah, maybe he was right. But it takes a while to get there. And some people perhaps might think that it should have ended before. But, you know, and all the time, you know, after you think it's ended, and it just goes on and on, the pianistic difficulties just multiply, and there's an ocean of notes there. And it's a fantastically strong statement, I think, and I can tell you that the Wigmore Hall audience just exploded. It's the only word I have for it. I mean, they were really quite stunned by this music, which I'm very, very happy to say.
Maybe an obvious question, but does it really matter to you what the audience reaction is?
Oh, yes.
I mean, maybe you feel like you have an obligation to bring rare repertoire to be heard, and that makes a statement, and that's for the composer. But
I feel that also when I play a Schubert sonata, because I want them to appreciate what I did with it.
So,
or I want them to I guess I want them egotistically to know that I've been a good translator of what Schubert intended. I hope it's not too presumptuous to say that, you know, but in essence, that's what we're on stage for.
The final work on your Carnegie recital tomorrow will be Schubert's Last Sonata. Mm-hmm. And you've talked about the fact that you were perhaps glad that you didn't record it too early.
Oh, yes.
At what point do you know that maybe it's time that you can?
I could have done it a few years ago, actually, but I'm glad that I waited even longer.
What do you think you didn't have at that time that you have now?
That may be for listeners to say, because I don't always have a clear view of these things. I can tell you that at the very beginning, I started playing this sonata. It was in 1997. I remember clearly. The third and fourth movements were much too fast. I think I had a very similar outlook about the first two movements as I do now. But
I mean, was the difference?
I didn't have a clear picture of what I wanted with the last two movements.
I mean, was the difference in tempo truly vast, or was it also?
Yes, it wasn't. It just wasn't good. But of course, when it had been in the back of my mind to start working on the work for quite a while, and when I finally did, it was just like a world opening up. And of course, like an idiot, first thing I wanted to do was to record it. And I after a little while, I held back that thought, because I thought, no, this is just not right.
Hard to put it in words, but what is this piece to you, and why are you playing it tomorrow?
It is exactly that. It's hard to put in words. I'm still trying to define why it is so affecting. I could be platitudinous and say, well, it's a matter of Schubert getting all the proportions right and expressing his emotions in the most perfect way. But that's an easy thing to say, and it really doesn't explain anything. And as with the Beethoven late sonatas and the late string quartets, I feel that it is much better to leave things unexplained. And it's not a cop-out, believe me. It's really what I genuinely believe, because of course a lot of ink has been spilled about these pieces, and will continue to. And there will be many different views from performers, in which to solve the enigmas of these pieces, presented by these pieces, assuming they even have to be solved. But a wordless and explanationless expression, I think, through performance of these pieces is just as desirable.
I think of my own performances. I usually feel like they fall short of the vision that I intend. Mm-hmm. But do you ever feel like a performance of yours, or maybe this happens to you frequently, exceeds the sum of its parts, where you might be surprised that something you're doing takes on a life of its own almost?
Yeah, and it sometimes it happens. I remember a Schumann fantasy recently, which really transcended what I do with it usually, and it was totally unpredictable. I didn't know it was going to happen. Somehow, at certain points and on certain days, things click so well that new things start to happen. They're new things, but things which seem to fit within the context really well, and you wonder why they hadn't happened before. And that's a tremendously uplifting and elevating feeling.
Is that about listening? Is that about sensitivity? Is that about the moment and reacting to the audience?
It's about a marriage of all of the circumstances. All the elements come together, and suddenly you have a kind of a synergy, I guess, which, I mean, one wishes that one could command it to happen every time. But maybe if it happened every time, it would get boring after all.
So we're talking about achieving difficult musical aims. If we're going back to complex scores like the Feinberg, is it really possible to stay emotionally engaged in the most complex and physically demanding technical moments?
Speaking for myself, yes, because every second of my performance, I always think about the audience. I'm really, really serious.
Would you say that's in the forefront of your awareness, listening from their perspective?
Oh yes, oh yes. If I have one basic principle in everything I do, is whether it's the Feinberg Third or the Moonlight Sonata, I always play everything as if no one in the audience had ever heard it before. That really forces me to be clear in my emotional projection. And it is the best way for me to make sure, or to make as sure as possible, that they get the message as directly as I can provide it.
Is there anything that you haven't achieved yet that you hope to still add to your life?
Well, at this point, I'm often asked about dream pieces.
I think you've played them all.
I've been able to fulfill so many wishes, so many private wishes that I don't think there's anything left. I mean, at this point, if I want to do something, I'll be able to find an avenue for it. I mean, that's not a problem really. What I would like to do more is to broaden my network of orchestras to play with and conductors to play with, and also recital organizations, and do more chamber music. That would be great. I mean, even within the world of classical music, which is practically microscopic, compared to the world of more popular music, there's still almost an infinite number of avenues, to explore. So, and I'm happy with that.
And finally, I'm wondering, what's inspiring you these days, musically or otherwise?
What's inspiring me? Well, I mean, I should mention that I happen to be married to an extraordinary woman. Her name is Kathy Fuller, and she was trained as a pianist, and sharing my life with her has been just such a joy, an inexpressible kind of joy, and the fulfillment that she has given me, and hopefully that I've given her a little bit too, has been. I mean, I just don't have words for it. I really bless the day that I met her, and we continue to be, real soulmates.
Marc, thank you so much for joining us. It's been a pleasure talking about life and music, and to finally have you on the show. And I wish you many years of continued success.
It's been a privilege.
Awesome. It was fun. Yes.